All right, so in this lesson, we're doing the building collapse using Tyflow. And there are a few things happening that we haven't covered yet in this course. Number one, we are only emitting smoke if the pieces are moving. And we are only emitting smoke out of the broken faces, so from the edges basically. And then also we're emitting more smoke the faster the pieces are falling. So a few interesting techniques and an introduction to the Tyflow plugin in this lesson. So this is what it looks like rendered for one frame. I haven't yet had time to render the whole animation, but by the time this course comes out, you will be able to see the final rendered animation on my social media. All right, so I have this post-apocalyptic building structure that we're gonna destroy. It is to real world scale, so I'm working in units, meters. One unit is 10 centimeters. And first, we're gonna destroy this with Tyflow. And I want that sort of gradual destruction where it sort of gets destroyed from the top and then goes to the bottom. So if you took my advanced water effects course, we did the same thing with the statue. And then we have the statue basically collapse into the ocean. So it might look familiar to some of you. So basically I'm just gonna make a box and we're gonna tell Tyflow that everything that's inside this box should get destroyed. So we're just gonna animate it to go from top to bottom. So I'm gonna set a key and then maybe go to frame, let's say 150, and move this all the way down and make a key. So you should have just something super simple like this happening. Now let's right click, go to object properties and make it not renderable. Then right click again, go to Phoenix FD properties, make it not a solid object. And actually let's go back to object properties and make it display as box. And I'm gonna go under standard and just create a Tyflow object and then go into the Tyflow editor. So if you are completely new to Tyflow, I have a lot of Tyflow tutorials on the Redefine FX YouTube channel. But just to give you a brief introduction, basically we're gonna turn this model into a Tyflow particle and then we can destroy that particle essentially. So in order for us to convert it, we need to create a birth objects operator. And I'm just gonna pick this building. And then if I drag, you can set this to geometry. And then we can basically just hide the original model and just work with the Tyflow particle, which looks like this. Now we need to fracture this into pieces. So I'm gonna do a Voronoi fracture operator, which is right here, the yellow one. And for now, let's do something like 100 fragments. So now basically the model is fractured, but nothing happens. So we need to add a physics shape operator and put it right under Voronoi fracture. And now what you should see is that the whole building will basically fall down immediately. So this is pretty cool, but we want to be able to control the destruction. So I'm actually going to add a physics switch and I'm gonna say kinematic. So right now, these pieces are physics shapes, but they are not dynamic. They are basically just staying in place until we tell it what else we want it to do. So I'm actually gonna do a surface test condition operator. So right now I'm setting a condition where I'm saying if these pieces are inside of this box, so I'm gonna say pick and pick this box, then I want something to happen. We want to set the surface test type to volume inside. So telling it if these pieces are inside of this box, then something happens. So I'm going to do another physics switch and set it to dynamic and connect it to the surface test. And you can set the display again to geometry and we can make the color maybe green. And this color, maybe we can do orange just to better differentiate. And so now if I drag my timeline, you can see that the pieces that are inside of the box are slowly turning green because they are being activated with this surface test. And they fall down while the yellow pieces stay in place, just like we wanted to. So with all of this set up, I'm just gonna add more fragments. I'm gonna go back under Voronoi fracture and maybe do 500 points. So it might take a bit longer to simulate everything. But right now this is what we have. So that's exactly what I had in my example. You can see it just sort of gradually gets destroyed So these are the pieces that we're gonna work with moving forward. So there are a few things that you need to do for Phoenix to be able to recognize these Tyflow chunks and use them as emitters. Number one, we need to add a mesh operator, and you wanna uncheck render only so that it actually shows the mesh inside of the viewport so that Phoenix can see it. I'm gonna close this, and number two thing you wanna do is select the main Tyflow node and go under interfaces and say enable particle interface. And now we're gonna make a fire source, and I'm gonna just add Tyflow as the source. And before you forget, just go down here into the PRT shape and set it to use particle shape. So if you don't do this, it'll basically just see each chunk as just one individual particle, but we want to see it as a fragment. So you need to change this to use particle shape. And for the temperature, let's do 290. So again, 300 is neutral, so 290 will mean that the smoke will fall down just ever so slightly because we want to make it look like that sort of heavy construction smoke that doesn't just rise up. We want it to stick to the ground. Now for the amount of smoke, I ended up doing just 0.5 because I didn't want too much. And for the outgoing velocity, we can just do something like 0.5 meters. Next up, let's make the Phoenix grid around our destruction area. Say Z gemmed on minus. And let's enable adaptive grid by smoke. Again, threshold 0.01 and 5 for the margin. And maybe we need to raise this up a little bit. 0.1 meters is good to start. I basically left everything at default because we just need this pretty uneventful basic smoke to happen. And these basic settings work pretty well for that. I would just maybe change the conservation quality to something like 50. And we need to give it at least 2 steps per frame because we have these blocks falling down pretty fast. We're only emitting smoke, so we don't need any fuel. And the rest of it is standard GPU preview. And let's output velocity. So before we get any further, let's run the sim and make sure that this is working as expected. And I can see right away that it's not working entirely well because we're emitting the smoke out of the pieces across their entire surface instead of just the inside portion of it where basically the fractures are. So I'm gonna go back into Tyflow, and I think we forgot to go under Voronoi fracture, and then we need to go all the way down to the fractures, and let's set the override cap ID, and let's set it to an ID of 2, and then I think we need to go back under the source. And let's set the polygon ID here to 2 as well and see if that will solve the problem. So let's stop the sim and run again. All right, so that solved that specific issue. We are now emitting smoke only on the inside faces. However, the problem that we need to fix now is that we only really want to emit the smoke out of these faces when the pieces start falling down. Otherwise, you get this really weird effect happening. So we need to go under the Phoenix source again, and you get these modifiers for the outgoing velocity. So I'm just gonna click on this plus under the next to the modifiers, and then you can say modify outgoing velocity by, and we want to modify it by speed when you think about it. So when the speed is 0, we don't want to emit any smoke, and when the speed is larger than a certain number, we want to start emitting smoke across these fractured faces. So I'm gonna say by speed, and then you get this graph, and for the space I would set it to world, which gave me better results. And you can just expand the graph, and it can be a bit confusing because it doesn't really tell you which is which, but I found that the x-axis, basically the red one, is the speed, and the y-axis, the green one, is the amount of smoke. So basically what you want to do is make another point and drag this point down. So you're basically telling Phoenix that only if the speed is above this amount here, you want to start emitting some smoke. And honestly, I really hope that they're going to fix this graph to make it more clear sort of what is happening. And actually, one more thing I want to address is that we don't really get any fractures until about frame, let's say 40. So I'm actually gonna go under Phoenix and say that I want to start the simulation on frame 40 so that we're not simulating these 40 frames for nothing where nothing really happens. Alright, so I'm running the sim and it's working surprisingly well. If I pause this and just scrub through, you can see that it's only if the pieces reach a certain speed that they begin emitting smoke. You can tell that there's a fracture here, but unlike a few minutes ago where we had smoke in all of these cracks, there's cracks here, but there's no smoke inside of them. So our outgoing velocity modifier is working perfectly right now. And if you wanted to modify it even more, you could go back under the fire source. You can always click on these arrows to go back into that modifier. And if, let's say, I wanted the smoke to be emitted only if the pieces are moving even faster, then I could just move this point further. So now I'm basically telling Phoenix, only if the pieces are moving above this speed, which is like 55 or something like that, then I want them to start emitting smoke. So you have a lot of control here with these modifiers to get some really cool effects. So basically, if I were to keep running this simulation, it would end up looking almost exactly like what I had before over here, just to give you an idea. Now, of course, you can just go into the shader right now like we're used to, go to volumetric options. You can maybe give it a lighter color for the smoke, so something more white-ish. And you can maybe increase the smoke opacity to something like 0.7 if you would like, just to make the smoke stand out. But in this case, I actually found that less is more. That decreasing the smoke opacity and just having a little bit in there actually ends up make it look even nicer because you get this variety on opacity and it looks pretty nice. So, you know, this was one of the most requested lessons. A lot of people were asking me, hey, how do I combine Tyflow with Phoenix? I want to do building destructions, wall destructions and stuff like that. So you can use this same setup to do any kind of destruction effects. Really, I think most people just aren't aware that you need to add the mesh operator and uncheck render only. Then you need to do it properly under Voronoi with fracture ID so that you're only emitting smoke out of those fractures. And then under Phoenix, don't forget to set the PRT shape to use particle shape, set polygon ID to 2, and you should be good to go. And you can, you know, obviously use everything else that we've covered in this course as far as emitting fire out of these chunks and whatever else you have in mind. So as always, I hope that you guys found this helpful. As far as the render, I just did V-Ray plane on the ground, and I have a simple V-Ray light on top, just adding some illumination. So nothing fancy, pretty standard. Just wanted to show you the Tyflow setup. This is officially the last big lesson of this course. I only have a few more quick tip lessons that I want to show you that you might not be aware of, some cool little things that you can do with Phoenix. But this is almost it for the course. Really hope you guys have enjoyed these lessons, and I'll see you in the next one.